Good morning. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Marilyn Orr, President of the club, and we are thrilled to have you join us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV, as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel and Facebook. Our club meets weekly using this digital platform, Zoom. When we meet in person, it's at Laurel Lake Retirement Community for breakfast. We hope to get back to that soon. We meet most Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. So come out to join us for a meeting. We would love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact we are having on our local community and the world, please visit our website, rotaryhudson.org. So enjoy this meeting today and help us share the message that Rotary opens doors of opportunity.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Kelly Brennan.
Oh, I need that. Thank you. I've never done this in jeans. We bow our heads. May God give you, for every storm, a rainbow, for every tear, a smile, and for every care, a promise, and a blessing in each trial. For every problem life sends, a faithful friend to share. For every sigh, a sweet song, and an answer to each and everyone's prayer. Amen.
Thank you, Kelly. And to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, Catherine Signs.
Good morning, Rotarians. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test of the things that we think, say, and do. Number one, is it the truth? Number two, fair to all concerned. Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a good week.
Thank you, Catherine. And now our president, Pat Shear.
Thank you, Ron. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started today. We have a couple of meetings right after our meeting today. We have a board meeting and we have a foundation meeting today immediately following the board meeting. Rotary International has introduced two new officer positions for club positions. The two new ones are Youth Protection Chair, and Jim Ahern has agreed to take on that role for us. But one of the other ones that they're looking for is a Service Project Chair. And that would be coordinating our service projects working. They don't have to chair each one of the projects, but making sure that as we're going out and doing community service projects, that they're the one coordinating and reporting back to the board. So if anybody is interested in potentially that role, I'd be happy to talk with you after. I don't think it's going to be anything that would be overly onerous, but if you're service oriented, that might be a good opportunity for you. And Jim Ahern will introduce our speaker. Oh, James will stone me if I don't. We still need one or two more individuals to help us with the AV setup and backup, so that if James and Tom go to a school board orientation, that we still have people that know how to set up our equipment. Kelly's helping, but we still could use one or two others. So if you're interested, see James or myself immediately after the meeting. Jim?
Thanks, Pat.
Good morning, Rotarians. Our speaker today has spent most of World War II. He's a prisoner in Japan, in the Philippines, which he describes in his book that he's holding, Rescue Raids of Luzon. Though a civilian child, he was reclassified by Japan into the same category as military prisoners. Beginning at the age of 8, he had to mature quickly, take on responsibilities for the family, even earning money. A student of history, his book embraces the experiences with the parallel events of the Pacific War in that saved their family and other prisoners from massacre or starvation. It was a race that came very close, but let him survive past February of 1945 due to the largest, deepest, and most daring of 3 rescue raids where they had ringside locations. All 3 raids were covered in the book. Joe is a 30-plus year Rotarian in Cuyahoga Falls. He has a familiar badge on, look at that. And he was a past president at the same time. But he's also a retired electrical engineer. His work and growing up took him over 40 countries and resulted in several patents. He's been married 57 years, which he's described as wonderful, has resulted in 2 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 5 grandchildren of whom he is proud. Let's give a warm welcome to not only a warm Rotary welcome to a fellow Rotarian.
Thank you, and a very warm Rotary welcome to the Hudson Club from the Cuyahoga Falls Club. And if you'll forgive me, but I don't feel well standing behind walls after my, yeah. So I much, you know, given my choice, I'd be standing down there just to be a little closer, but it's also a pleasure to talk about a time, some very primitive time, some 80 years ago, when the process of going from Akron to our southern Philippine plantation took a month, most on ships. It was a very different time and, as I say, very much more primitive. It's a story in the book that I finally, after COVID and what have you, got published, of our family's experience, along with that of some 7,800 other military and civilian prisoners of Japan in the Philippines. And that's the number that were surviving as we went into 1945. It's a story, too, of a race, because the success of the American Navy in cutting down shipping and the success of the Philippine American guerrillas had reached the point that even the Japanese soldiers were on very short rations. So as prisoners, we got, you know, we were a couple of steps below that, and starvation was setting in. But it was a race that ended with the 3 raids that I describe in the book, and I will summarize this morning, if I may. We were in the Philippines because my dad had probably the most important job in the Philippines, that of rubber. Rubber was going to cause the war to take 10 years. And Goodyear was in the process of trying to set up 100 square miles of American, not US, but American plantations in Central and South America. They were being planted with seedlings, which were double bud grafted, one for the trunk and one for the blight resistant leaves on the plantation that my dad managed. It was tiny, it was only 4 square miles, but he was producing these double bud grafted seedlings and shipping them back beginning in 1935. In January 35, my parents and I first went to the plantation and he took over as manager. It was so important that the Army was retiring their B-18 Bolo bombers. And every one that came back was loaded with seedlings and rubber tree seeds from the plantation to get America going on rubber before synthetic rubber, which never can match the tree rubber that was used. As I say, it was going to take 10 years. And fortunately, they come up with synthetic rubber, but we didn't know that at the time. Goodyear had suggested that women and children go home. Mom said she'd married for better or for worse, and we were staying together as a family. And at this point, when we were captured in June 30th of 1942, after the surrender of Bataan and Corregidor, and also after the stop to the Japanese expansion with Coral Sea, Midway, and the beginning of the Battle of Guadalcanal. I was 8. My younger sister was 6.5. My younger brother was 5.5. And it is a story of what they did to keep us alive, to give us a home life in that kind of a situation, and to do so that we came out without fear or hatred, which, as I look back, is something I'm not sure I could do, and I think is a real mark of their ability. And it's a point I try and get across in the book as to how they managed to do that. On the 3rd of July, we were taken to a temporary camp in Zamboanga, where I went under the wire, but at an 8-year-old, I managed to get back without getting caught. We then went to Davao on a minesweeper, sleeping on the deck of a minesweeper. At Davao, we met more prisoners who were being collected, and there were 10 nurses from Bataan who had got as far as Mindanao on their way to Australia when their plane ran into a problem, and when they got it fixed, they couldn't be found. So they missed going to Australia, and they were with us. And it was shocking, even for an 8-year-old. They wore men's pants. That was just unheard of. But it started, of course, on Bataan. It was the first time that the idea that it's a lot more efficient to operate in the jungle with pants rather than trying to keep a skirt going. But they were shipped out. We were shipped down to a place called the Happy Life Blues. And for 15 months, we lived far better than the military prisoners in the Davao Penal Colony, some 30 miles north of us. The family working together, including the 5-year-old, built a shack because otherwise we were on the dance floor of a cabaret when each of us got 4 feet by 7 feet, and that was our home. So in place of that, we could get the family together and live together in a shack that we all built. And once built, Dad found scraps and was able to put together the equipment needed to make coconut oil. And again, the whole family made really nice coconut oil, which we could use and we could sell. And we had very little money because the Japanese required that we pay for and buy our own food for the first 8 months. So they provided nothing but the guards and the barbed wire and the dance hall, which had holes in the roof from being machine gunned. Finally, after 8 months, they gave us 70% of a minimum diet in the way of the local currency. As a result, we all ate on the low end of the eating scale, if you will. And many in the camp, or most in the camp, did not care for boiled eggplant and boiled okra and things like that. But my parents did their best. And when they could buy cassava root, Dad peeled off the cyanide lace skin, and the family made tapioca, which is where tapioca comes from. So we had a little dessert once in a while. As was just one of the many things that my parents did that gave us a little bit better situation than many of the others. On the 23rd of December, 1943, the commandant at roll call, and we had roll call twice a day, even the children lined up for roll call. He announced that we were leaving the next day when we were put in the hold of a Japanese Maru, a freighter. There were 2 high wooden platforms with just enough room for all 300 of us to lie down like sardines to sleep at night. And one upper section, we had 2 lady missionary friends, 2 older women. I mean, they may have been 30 or so, 40, at my age, they were old women, just like they were old men. But we were 10 days on the trip to Manila. And they kept very close to the shore and tried to avoid American submarines. But by that time, the Philippine-American guerrillas had something like 100 radio stations and observers scattered around the island. And I'm convinced that the American Navy probably knew where we were. So we were providing safe conduct for the Japanese who were also being shipped from Davao, because Davao was a strong Japanese colony at that time. We got to Manila and were trucked to the Santa Tomas internment camp, which is the picture on the cover of the book. I had an artist put together a 3-dimensional sketch of the camp that shows where we are and the situation on the time of our rescue. It was heaven on earth for us Hicks from Davao. Had lots better things than we had in Davao. They even had school on the top floor of the 3-story main building. Now you got 1 piece of paper and 1 pencil and an eraser, and that had to last a whole semester. So it was a very careful school. You wrote very lightly and then erased when you got finished. They even had movies, mostly Japanese propaganda films, but we could go to the movies, which seemed strange at that time. But we were, while all this was going on, back up a bit. At 1 week after we got there, Japan declared that all civilians were now the same as the military prisoners, POWs, in their words, war prisoners. And so at 9 years old, I was officially a military prisoner of war, as was my younger siblings. Dad bought a shack and added a loft bed for us children. And it was right catty-cornered across from a 3-story building that had 225 prisoners squeezed in, because everybody got 28 square feet. That was kind of the standard. And it also had some 60 Japanese guards on our end of the building on the lower floors. While this was going on, MacArthur was moving up, Nimitz was moving across the Pacific, and they were getting closer and closer to us. So what we didn't know was the battles that were going on, and I detail them in the books, the ones that really saved us. Because as of D-Day in Europe, 6/16/44, 6/6/44, excuse me, the plan to get to Luzon and to us would have been 3 months after we'd have all been dead from starvation. In addition to which, Japan had ordered their commandants to make sure that no prisoners survived. If rescue threatened, all were to be killed. This happened in Palawan Island on December 14th, 1944, when the commandant mistook a passing American fleet for an invasion, and he burned 157 military prisoners to death in that camp at that time. September 21st, we had our first air raid, and anti-aircraft shrapnel came. It caused 3 very close calls in our family, and the commandant had suggested we build air raid shelters. And somehow, in his weakened, starving condition, Dad managed to build a sod aircraft air raid shelter under our shack, which we could get into, and we're safe. I once had a piece come past my shoulder safely, landed on the floor, and I discovered as a little boy that shrapnel, new shrapnel, is very hot. So I made sure we let it cool off after that before we tried to pick any up. We also knew about the invasion of Leyte, which, as a result of Halsey's raid on Formosa, which took out the Japanese Army aircraft, and the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which destroyed much of the naval aviation of the Japanese aircraft carriers. They moved the invasion of Leyte up by 3 months. And those were life-saving months because we'd have all been dead otherwise. We didn't know about, we knew about the invasion, we got the word smuggled in, I guess. We knew about it the next day. It was announced over the radio or over the loudspeaker for the morning announcements. They couldn't say that, but they said the issue of food from the Japanese had been delayed again, and but better late than never. So everybody laughed and everybody knew that Leyte had been invaded. We didn't know about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the world's largest naval battle that has ever been and will ever be, because we don't do things that way anymore. In that battle, there were major engagements. In one, Halsey took off after Osawa's carriers, which had almost no planes and were no real threat, leaving room for Kurita with the battleship Yamato and a large fleet, a free path to the Leyte landing, which, if he had succeeded, would have also meant that none of the prisoners, some 7,800 prisoners in the Philippines, would have survived. The only thing that stood in Kurita's way was Ziggy Sprague's Taffy 3, half a dozen Jeep little tiny aircraft carriers designed for ground support, guarded only by a similar number of destroyers. Most of or half of them were designed for anti-submarine. So they, you got the 18.5-inch gun of the Yamato and the 6-inch guns of the destroyers. I mean, it was not really a fair, it was a desperate battle. And Ziggy Sprague put up a valiant effort. If you're in the naval history, it's one of the battles that I recommend that you see or you read about, because it is truly an inspiring effort. He lost the Gambier Bay, the carrier, and 3 destroyers, the Hull, the Johnsons, and the Roberts, and was about to get crushed when Kurita suddenly and inexplicably called for retreat and removal. He could have left a few cruisers to take care of the problem and gone on and done in the Leyte landing. But he saved our life and Halsey's reputation in the process. The order for our elimination, if we were going to be rescued, was the real cause for the raids that are kind of the focal point of the book. In 3 raids, all by different groups, from 25 different organizations, including 5 Philippine American guerrilla forces, rescued the 7,800 of us who were still alive. In the first, the raid on Cabanatuan has been made into a movie, The Great Raid. Some of you may have seen. But in that one, 2 guerrilla forces, a P-61, the Alamo Scouts and the Rangers, went 30 miles to find the Cabanatuan camp, which was on the main withdrawal route with hundreds of Japanese soldiers going by on a steady stream. They managed to get in there, kill several hundred Japanese, and got the local villagers to bring them out on carts drawn by carabas, which are notoriously slow. They managed to hold them off and get 511 starving, sick prisoners who were only there because they were too sick to be sent to slave labor, like most of the 25,000 Americans who had surrendered in April of 1942. The next raid left from near there and took a 100-mile looping route to come to get us. It was the 1st Cavalry 800-member flying squad, supported by the Marine 32nd and 24th Air Groups, who gave them their artillery, reconnaissance, and made it possible. They were almost to Manila when they stopped for the night, and an infiltrator managed to get in and detonate the charges on the bridge over the Tualahan River, cutting off the front 200. That 200 came on the next morning into a city with 17,000 Japanese Marines and soldiers, 100 of them, and the lead tank was by Robert E. Lee Jr., a descendant, came in, broke through the gate, and that group rescued us. Kids were squatted. My mother was standing next to my father on the row right in front of our shack. And the first soldier that came into the camp, into that part of the camp, said, "Are there any Japs around?" Well, Dad pointed to the building we were standing in front of and said, "The guards are there in the lower floors on this end." And I can remember he put something, I now know it's a walkie-talkie, up to his head and said something, and to us he said perimeter, and he took off for the wall of the camp. The guards made hostages of the 226, there was a visitor, and the Americans set up a 30 caliber machine gun in front of our shack, a 50 caliber in front of the main entrance to the building. And then on the roof of the main building, they had 2 more which covered the roof and the other sides of the building. It was tense and there was shooting. We had a lieutenant was hit in the hand right in front of our shack. But it got quiet. We went to bed. Our beds were like 2 or 3 yards from the front line, if you will. But on the 3rd day, under a truce, for the first and only time in the war, American and Japanese troops, armed, marched together. They went 5 blocks and separated, and we were free. And we could get food, which was great because the camp, almost everybody in the camp gained a pound a day for the first month, to show you. And we were still skinny at that point. So, I mean, it was an indication of the level of which starvation had occurred. The last raid, the 3rd raid, was on the Los Baños camp, which had something like 2,174 prisoners, civilian prisoners, and 9 Navy nurses. Oh, by the way, we had the Bataan Corregidor nurses in Santa Tomas. They had 9 nurses and 1 male aide, at the Los Baños camp, it was the most complicated. It included a 11th Airborne Augmented group of guerrillas who came in to kill the guards and clear the landing zone, and airdrop from a nearby airport to bring in the troops to guard the camp, and then an Alligator LBD-4 landing across the lake. They also had a diversionary attack on the main line a little further along. It was necessary because the camp was in the middle of the crack Japanese 8th Division, and the result was success. They had to burn the camp down because everybody wanted to go back and get their precious things when they really didn't have time. But they got all of the prisoners out, and the last alligators leaving were coming under fire from the 8th Army 8th Division that was coming in to take over, but they succeeded. The guerrillas vanished into the forest, in the jungle, and they had succeeded in getting them all. Liberation did not mean survival. In Santa Tomas alone, 65 people died of starvation even after they had food and medicines. They had bodies that just used themselves up so much they couldn't survive. In the Battle of Manila, 40 within the camp were killed and some 200 were injured. And in the Battle of Manila, which was a terrible battle, 1,010 American soldiers died. Some almost 17,000 Japanese soldiers died, and over 100,000 Philippine civilians perished. Manila and Warsaw were the two worst destroyed major cities of World War II. But the stories of the heroism of my mother going out under shell fire when my dad was too sick to leave the shack, I can't say enough about my parents. We, on the 14th of March, the battle was over. We were taken to Clark Airfield, got on a DC, not a DC, it's a C-46, and were flown to Leyte. I noticed little anti-aircraft burst beside the plane, and when we got up to, kids were given a chance to talk to the pilot and go to see the cockpit. I asked the pilot about those anti-aircraft bursts, and he says, well, we're safe, we're far enough away, so that's not a problem. But so I didn't worry. We got to Leyte, and shortly were put on a Dutch freighter, which had been converted into a hospital ship, transport ship, and went in convoy to Biak off New Guinea, which was a major hospital at that point, and then Finch Haven, Hollandia, and finally on our own, because we were a fast ship, zigzagged across the Pacific to keep the submarines minimized. Finally, we got to California's answer to the Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge, fireboats and horns honking and what have you. And shortly, we were back at the Mayflower Hotel at the end of 40 days from leaving Santa Tomas. Time to go back to kind of a normal childhood for us. And, but there was one more piece to the story. MacArthur, after we got back, issued an order, or an order by order of, and each of my parents got an Asiatic Pacific campaign ribbon with a battle star. And the notation is, by their courage and fortitude, have contributed materially to the campaign in the Philippines. Thank you, and I'm open for questions if we have any.
before we do a question, I'm just going to put something up on the screen here. And let's see. And if you can, so people might, yeah, there it is. If you could talk about how you can get this, I actually have the
Okay.
book up here.
I have
It's-
brought little cards describing what's on the back and the front of this that are sitting on the little stand in front of where I was sitting directly back there. You're welcome to take them, and books available. You can order it through Barnes and Noble or Amazon, or if anybody's interested.
Yeah, I just Googled it and there's something, I guess something called Author House that also has it.
Author House was a publisher.
Okay, great.
Good morning.
Good
Thank
morning.
you. Appreciate your talk. At the beginning, you mentioned about your parents and how they helped you to live afterward without fear or hatred, which I think is a fantastic thing. Can you say a little bit more about that? How is it that they helped you to avoid both of those negative extremes?
I think the biggest thing was they gave us as close as they could to a normal life. They didn't panic. They didn't show fear. They had worries. They talked about them between themselves out of the time when we could hear about them. So we did not pick up on any of their worries in the course of things. And they treated everybody equally. They didn't rant and rave about the Jap soldiers and what have you. And so it was a case of, if they don't fear, I have nothing to fear about. We have nothing to fear about. And as I say, the book covers a number of things that they did that really kept us in a normal childhood. They even gave us Christmas presents, which they handmade. And because they involved the whole family in the projects, we all felt we were like a farm family. We were part of the team and going on. But I have never heard them say a single word then or afterwards of either fear or hatred. And I think it passed down.
You mentioned that this started, you were 8 years old, so you were approximately 12 when you got back to the States.
No, I was 10 and a half when we
Oh,
got back to the States.
Okay. How did do you remember getting back into a normal education? You know, you hadn't been to school, you had been through all this. Do you remember much about getting back to school and a normal existence in the real world?
I remember that part very clearly. We got back on the 24th of April, which was too late in the year to start a school. And for the first several weeks, we went to a lot of schools because they were trying to sell war bond stamps, 25-cent war bond stamps. Now, in today's money, that stamp is like $3.50. So, you know, it's not insignificant. But we would get hauled to the school, put on the PA system, and they would ask questions, and we would talk about our experience. And we got acquainted with that. We got finished with that. We had a summer rent control. You couldn't get to your house. You couldn't kick out the people who were renting your house. So Dad had to buy another house. It was on Portage Lakes, and we learned to swim, and we had a normal summer. And then shortly after school started, he went back to get the plantation started, and we took the first ship back in May of 1946 to go back to the plantation, and a couple more years of fantastic plantation living. We went barefoot all the way through the war as kids. And when we got back to the plantation, we went barefoot again. We could run on gravel. We hiked through the forest or the jungle, and it was a great time.
Just a couple of questions. One is that At any time, do you know if, did you, or do you know if your parents despaired that you would not be rescued, or did you always feel that that would happen?
They never talked about that. We had the rumor mill, if you will. We had the situation where we were seeing American airplanes, B-29s even, over Manila while we were still prisoners. So we knew that things were progressing. We were also starving. In January 45, Dad came down with beriberi. He was so ill that at 10, I was the one to take the family ration coupons and go across and bring back the family food. But, that's something we did. We just, like a farm family, you do it and you don't think about it. But
And then I also have to ask, okay, so during COVID in the last school year, kids had to stay at home and then they had to go hybrid, and now they may have to wear masks. And we're hearing about parents about how kids just, it's too much and too burdensome for them to handle, and psychologically and otherwise. Do you feel maybe a sense of irony compared to what the experiences that you went through?
well, I'm unusual. I was homeschooled first through ninth grade by my mother with something called Calvert Home Instruction, which I find was better than my sons and my grandchildren have received, because you got such a sense of wanting to know, wanting to learn, to catch up for all the lost years. When we got back to the plantation, we went year round. We'd take a week or 2 weeks off between finish of one year and start of another. But the kids were telling Mom, we're ready to go, let's go. Because there's a whole box of books, new things to learn. And she wouldn't let us touch them until we started the school year. And so we put a lot of pressure on, and I think she would have liked to have a little time off. But I really believe that other than the social effects of education and the social organizations that go on, and my mother had a high school education, she's not a teacher, that students can learn as well at home. And it's primarily the ability to socialize with other students is the real advantage. Part of the thing was we could be done by noon. We were finished with everything, because as soon as we finished one subject, we moved to the next, and then we're done. We had the whole afternoon to ourselves. And I believe we need to get face to face without masks. That's my personal belief.
Yeah, but it also sounds like kids could be far more resilient than people may give them credit for, since you went through starvation and threats of being killed. I mean,
with parents like I had, yes.
You mentioned a very small space that you had to exist in. I'm sorry, what was it like? Did you say 4 by 8 feet or 7 feet?
4 by 7 feet.
Was that
Everybody
per-
got roughly 28 square feet.
Each person?
Each person.
Okay.
So, if you were an adult, and nobody had any beds or cots or anything. I mean, it's everybody was sleeping on the floor. But when you get home, march out 4 by 7 feet on the floor and say, that's where I've got to live. That's where I'm going to have all of my stuff. And it's totally open, and you've got all the privacy of nothing. Thank you very much. And as I say, there's cards if you want them.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was a inspiring presentation that you gave. And if into society today, if we could live without fear and without hatred, how much better of a world we would be in. I made a mistake this morning. I didn't give you my quote to start the day. And because it's the start of football season, I had to do a football related quote. Leaders are made, they are not born. They are made by hard effort, which is the price which all of us must pay to achieve any goal that is worthwhile. Vince Lombardi. And we have our drawing for our raffle. Marilyn, did you buy tickets? Well, that's okay. You can still pick. Oh, there's two. There you go. All right. And the winning number that has an opportunity to win $11 and the jackpot payout of $180 if they pick the right marble is 716380. I confirm that there's a black one in there.
There is.
All right. Okay. You do have your $11. Thank you very much, sir. Just a reminder that we do have the board and foundation meeting immediately after our meeting today. And the way to close our meeting today is, how do billboards communicate? Sign language.